Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and what I did is I have a hook in my Merced React hooks library called useDataStore. What it does, it uses it uses a use reducer and context to create a sort of Redux-like application level state, and it works really well. It does what it's supposed to do. But one of a couple of issues I ran into working with that pattern is one, you can't really do asynchronous functions inside the reducer because the reducer needs to return the new state. And the minute you start doing asynchronous functions, if you're working with .thens, you can't really return the data. And if you make it an async function, whatever you return is always going to be a promise. So that means any asynchronous operations you do, you have to kind of do before you run the dispatch function on to trigger changes in state, which is fine. But one of the kind of reasons you kind of have the whole reducer pattern is because you kind of want to house a lot more of your application logic outside of your components. Okay, kind of centralize it in that reducer. So what I did is I created a sort of a slightly different pattern. So instead of you passing a reducer function, okay, so I created a new hook. Instead of you passing a reducer function, what you do is you pass in an object of functions. And then each function will always get passed in the state, the set state function, and a payload. Okay, and I call this TaskRunner. The benefit is now you can do asynchronous events inside, because when the set state function runs is not just on return of the function, because the way reducer works is that the reducer gets returned to the set state function under the hood. So in that case, that's why the return value is so important. Here, the return value doesn't have to necessarily be what becomes a new state. You decide you actually don't really need to return a value at all. Basically, it just runs a function, and that function gets passed the set state. So you can decide when the state gets set in that function. So if you want it to be set in an asynchronous function, you can. If you want it to be set somewhere else along the function. If you want the function to not set the state at all, you just kind of want it to be a utility function you have available throughout your app, you can do that too. You can, and so essentially you can just create this big giant object of all the functions you need throughout your application, and they'd be available in this sort of task runner. So I just updated the library, and I'm going to let's take a look. Okay, so what I'm going to do is so this is like with data store, right? So I created this with data store. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file called tr for taskrunner.js, and here we're going to use the task runner. So we're going to import create, well, actually let me do it this way, from Merced React hooks, so this way it recognizes what's in there. So this time I can type in create, and yes, I want create task runner. Okay, that's what I want to import. So first thing I want to do is create the initial state, so that's always the same. Initial state. Gotta start somewhere. So const initial state equals, and we'll just start with count, which is 0. And then we're going to create our task list, which is the object with tasks. Okay. So const task list equals, and it's an object, and we'll create a key called add. And again, each arrow function takes in the state, set state, and a payload. Okay, so then this function, all it will do is just set the state up a number. So set state, and again, we want to keep the existing state in case there's other properties. And then we want to update count to be state.count plus 1. Okay, there. And see, I don't have to worry about like setting up a switch statement. It's just a property in an object. Okay, and then I will just set up another one for sub. Okay, and because I have that access to that set state function, again, I could just do a fetch, and then in that second .then, just set the state. Okay, so this makes it easier to kind of do that kind of thing. And here's what I'm doing. I'm actually going to make this by the payload. So basically, you're going to add the payload. Okay, and this is going to be subtract, and then this will be sub. Because the way it works is that you're going to pass in a string when you use the function, and that string will decide which of these keys will be invoked as a function and pass these things. Okay, cool. So there you go. That's set up. I think that's a little bit less verbose and a little bit easier than read than a reducer. So that's a plus. Okay, so then we create our task runner. Okay, create task runner. This is going to be very similar to how the data store pattern works. So we're going to do const, and the first is going to be our task store component. That's going to be the provider component that provides that state to your application. And then after that is going to be the use task store hook, which is going to be the hook that basically allows you to pull in the run task function and the state in any component. Okay, so I go equals create task runner, and then again the task runner, I'm going to pass in the initial state and the task list. Okay, and there you go. Okay, so that is done. Okay, and this needs to be exported, so let's export that. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's not so bad. See, that was actually a lot easier to set up. Okay, so now I go back to index.jsx, and kind of like I did with data store, I'm going to import, instead this time is task store, from ./tr. Okay, in this case we're going to wrap this around here, so task store, and then again I need to put the closing task store at the end, Control X. Oh, we wrap so many things around app sometimes, all these providers. So this would be like sort of the more Redux-like pattern. This is going to be sort of my new pattern here for the object. Okay, so now that that's there, we can now go back to app.js, and now I'm going to bring in const, and I'm just say, well, import empty curly brackets for now from ./tr, and I want to bring in use task store. Okay, and then when I bring in use task store, so it's kind of like we did use data store here, I do const and equals use task store. Okay, and I kind of forget, but I'm pretty sure it's task store is we get the state, and then the function is called run task. Okay, well let's just double check. So let's npm run dev. Okay, Control Shift I. Let's take a look at our components. So here's the task store component. Let's see here. Let's make sure see it has a state. Good. Okay, and that was all good for me. The context provider. Okay, and that's providing, well, that's the data store's context provider. Oh, I see. That's the children. So yeah, there it is. Run task. That's the name of the function. Okay, and it's providing that in the task store. Okay, so run task. Oop. Always do that. I need to restart my computer. It's starting to get a little chuggy from running so many things over the last few days. Okay, here we go. So in that case, what I would do is I would replace dispatch. So here where I use dispatch, so I'm going to change this to task store.count. Okay, so if you saw the first Merced React hooks video, then you're familiar with the setup. So basically here I'm just using the task store. I'm using that count variable in task store. But here I was using dispatch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to run task. And you see this is going to look a lot less verbose because I don't need to write type and payload. Okay, I can just write run task, and then it's just I put a string that's a type, so add, and then I put in the payload, which will say it's 2. Okay, that's pretty nice and much better looking. Okay, and then this would be sub. And yeah, 2. So now technically when we click the button, it'll always add or subtract 2. So that should be all up and working. Okay, so let's try it out. Bring this back to first screen. Let's go back to that first panel. There we go. Back over here. Okay, refresh. Now, if this is all working, I should be able to add and subtract 2. And it works. And if I take a look at the context provider, I should see that the state is updating. So there it is. See, count is 4. Count is 2. So it works. It works. And then I can add other functions that don't, the functions don't have to update the state, because it's not built into the way the TaskRunner works. So I could add another function if I wanted to just make it available to, I could put yell. Okay, and then just sit there and put, just normal state, set state, payload. And maybe all I have this do is just, alert the payload. Or alert payload. Okay, it never sets the state, doesn't change anything. But that's fine, okay, because again, it doesn't have to, the way this is set up. So now I can go back over here to app, and let's add a button. A button, and we're just going to call it yell, and then we're going to say on click. What we're going to do is we're going to yell. So we're going to use the run task function. Run task, the task is yell. And the payload will be whatever, oops. The payload will be whatever form data dot name is. Again, that's the form there. That's, oh, did I did that funny. I invoked it already in there, didn't I? Yep, I gotta pass in an arrow function. If this would unfreeze. There we go. So let's do this. There we go. Run task yell form data dot name. That works for me. Let me get rid of this question mark over here. And now, if I type in a name, so we'll say, this is cool. Oh, that button disappeared. Why did, oh, here it is, yeah. This is cool, okay? And see, like, my state's still untouched, so having that, like, non-mutation, so I can still use it, and then use this. And, yeah, so basically I can have all the functions I want in that object, and make them usable through that run task, but when I want to, they can alter state, and when I don't want to, they can't. So that way I can just house a lot of tasks that exist within my application. So again, stateful application logic and non-stateful application logic in that task list. So that's pretty cool. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.